Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the VIA Learning webinar on winning sales with Hewlett-Packard, and it's strategic uses for gaming in sales training. So I'd like to first off introduce who we have here today. Myself, Darren, I'll be the moderator for today. We also have Julie Brink, who's the Director of E-Learning at VIA Learning. Julie has over 10 years of experience in training and development, everything from curriculum design to implementation, production, and other areas, working with clients like Cisco, Microsoft, Comcast, Nike, HP, and others. So we're glad to have Julie here and your experience of e-learning and gaming. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Darren.
Also with us, we're very pleased to have Carol Cohen from Hewlett-Packard with us. Carol, in addition to having 14 plus years of experience just working at HP alone, Carol has won several awards, including awards of distinction with STC, 3 I believe now, 4 in fact, ASTD, Excellence in Practice Awards, Brandon Hall Silver Medals, and we're very, very happy to have Carol with us, so thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
Alrighty, so just quickly touch on the 3 key areas that we're going to be reviewing today. We're going to take a look at obviously game-based learning and the actual game mechanics. So by that, we're talking about things that make a game a game. So and then turning that into an e-learning event. So think of kind of time, cadence, the overall interactivity, concepts of Sega and Destiny, and applying that to an e-learning environment. So we're not talking about creating Halo 3 when we're talking about gaming in the corporate space, but taking the conceptual elements like competition, etc., and applying that to an e-learning environment. We're also going to look specifically at sales applications for game-based learning. Sales is an area that we're continuously seeing more and more interest on sales, on the game-based learning. Some specific reasons for that, and we'll start to explore that too. And then we're going to look a little bit at how do you create stickiness, how do you measure and monitor the overall success of the game, how do we know that this is working well for your audience. So before we begin that, let's run a quick poll. We'll have a few of these as we go through. And the first poll we're going to do is a pretty simple question. Are you currently using gaming? So it's a yes or no answer. We just want to get a quick poll so we can get a feel for the audience in terms of how we talk to this. So we're currently seeing those numbers coming through. About 80% of you have voted, and it's split 50-50 right now. Okay, 53 to 47. Alrighty, so it looks like it's very, very even actually. It's very, very even indeed. Just slightly more or not than currently are using it. So that is interesting. Obviously, there's a lot of folks here looking to gain some information about how it can be used and where it can most adequately be used, and a lot of folks looking for ideas. So as we go through this webinar, we'll look to make sure that we're giving you that information as well. And please do feel free to ask questions as we go through. We will be having a Q&A session at the end where we can address any questions that you might have. Just go ahead, type those in. We'll collate those and run through those at the end. So let's talk a bit about game-based learning and the game mechanics. So Julie, perhaps you could tell the audience a bit about how games can apply to e-learning and what do we know about gamers?
Well, excuse me. Really, we've always learned through gaming, and so people have been gaming for generations and generations. 72% of American households currently play computer or video games, and that 72% spent $25 billion on video games and accessories and hardware in 2010. So this is really a great opportunity for the training industry in order to take advantage of people using gaming content and the technology around it. In addition, purchases of digital content in 2010 were accounted for 24% of game sales. That's astronomical. So, and that generated $5.9 billion in revenue just in and of itself. So we've always been playing games, and the technology has allowed us to really start playing them in a different way.
So computer-based gaming is a big deal.
Huge deal. And for the training folks, that really gives us an opportunity to expand our training capabilities and the way that we teach our adult learners and our children as well, but our adult learners too. So computers, as they are now, they really extend our natural game inclinations, and purchasing of digital content has grown so rapidly, so quickly, and so many people are playing games. It's only natural that we can integrate this into the training world. It's a phenomenal opportunity to take advantage of what people are already doing, which is playing games on computers. Great. So I think, Carol, we're going to talk about the difference between traditional and game-based learning.
Sure. So let's start with the most important question to ask of all. Why do I like games? But more specifically, why is everyone in HP's Learning and Development Department talking about games and gamification, a word I don't even like that much? Well, we have a lot of e-learning for our well over 250,000 employees, and many of those courses are real page turners. So let's look at the two approaches and compare them. With traditional e-learning, the content directs the learner, usually through a text-based lesson. The focus is generally on touching each page, which is mostly how you can count them, or how many seconds have they spent on the page, and ultimately, hopefully, passing the learning check at the end. And that's, at the very least, a linear path through the content. And at best, there's some branching and some personalization and maybe some interactivity. But in a learning game, the learner perceives a sense of self-directedness to achieve some type of goal. It's likely that there are incentives like milestone rewards to guide the learner. There may be a built-in redundancy to reinforce the learning, couched in, I'm quoting now my air quotes, fun, which ensures that the learner will not only tolerate the repetition, but also enjoy it. In a game, the focus is on the goal and the fun of attaining it. Now on the next slide, and I know I was a little harsh on traditional e-learning on that last slide, but for today we're focusing on games and learning, so we're giving them a little more attention. So let's look at the top game mechanics that make games work for sales. Think about any game that you like to play. It must be learner or player-centric. It must be built in easily digestible chunks. You can't get lost in the game. For example, you need to be able to go from one step to the next without losing your place. And I've already mentioned that sort of practice and reinforcement. We kind of like that. You know, some people play Angry Birds for hours on end. The main emphasis should be that it provides a safe place to learn, fail, recover, and pass or win. And games are all about the environment, the sights, the sounds, the interactivity, and it requires technology to provide that rich media, engaging graphics, user-friendly interface, and personalized interactivity. And you'll notice mobile up there in that purple box, pretty critical to the proliferation of games in our lives. But the most important mechanics to me fall under that third heading, the heading human factors. Motivation, collaboration, and contextualization. Think about it. It's at the heart of play. And I was going to do a whole thing in here about Red Rover, how that's a good example. So think of some of those playground games you used to play and how this applies to them, and then how we can apply that here in a corporate setting. Content may be king, but in a game, it's the internal motivation of the learner that drives the action. The game has to be compelling and inspire the learner to hang in there and keep trying. The game must foster collaboration either actively within the game, like you're racing the clock or you're racing the other zombie or whatever, or through shared experience outside of the game where people share their information once they've completed the game. And finally, it has to make sense to the learner and therefore, and when we're talking about sales, fit into their sales context. That means whatever learning occurs must easily fit back into their real life after the game is complete.
Great, thank you for that, Carol. And you know, I know that you had some thoughts on games as standalone versus part of a blended learning approach. Can you share those?
Yeah, well, in the corporate space, what we have found is that games are best served and played as part of a blended learning strategy. So while you can deliver a game as a standalone training course, so to speak. It really is best used when it's in collaboration and complementary to some other training tactics. So perhaps you have a game that reinforces what has been taught during instructor-led training, or a game will reinforce the content that was delivered during a web-based training. It supplements and it reinforces and helps the learner recall what they have already received during other trainings. They're like, oh, I remember I learned about that concept when I took the web-based training, or I reviewed that in my handbook. So getting that information time and time again. Repetition is key in remembering information. You know, you have to learn something, hear something about 3 times before you can really remember it and put it into your memory bank. So gaming is a great way to reinforce content.
Right, that makes sense. So, you know, as we've heard there, you know, the use of gaming is great in terms of putting it into a blended approach, using other areas, but the actual game itself is going to engage the learner in a very different way than more traditional face training.
Yep.
Alrighty. So, you know, we've also heard, you know, games for sales do have a particular resonance. You know, certainly from our experience, many organizations are increasingly looking to add games or gaming elements to learning programs. So, you know, how well does game-based learning work for sales departments? And Carol, perhaps you can talk us through, you know, when to use it.
Great, thanks, Darren. So for starters, just like Julie said, I would focus on enrichment in collaboration with a formal training program. Carefully select which content you think would be best to learn in a gaming setting in relation to your greater program. Gaming is a good way to sort of confirm knowledge, and a good way is a little vague. Fun for the learner, sort of easy to digest way to confirm knowledge of new products, maybe, if you want to reinforce some key facts about them, particularly when you're learning those key features and benefits. I love it when you can just isolate some key facts and then sort of use the natural fun redundancy of a game to sort of reinforce that in the learner. Think of the game when you want an easy way to ensure knowledge retention and reinforce that learning with a refresher. You know, here's a fun way to just sort of check your learning, check your knowledge, get a little new piece of knowledge. It can also be a handy way to renew or update existing knowledge when there's a change in the core knowledge area. So games can be especially conducive to learning certain processes such as the sales cycle or the sales business process, because you can just kind of get that key information in there and sort of, you know, over and over. They play the game over and over, so that enables them to just kind of reinforce what you want them to learn. They don't even, you know, they don't even realize they've been doing it over and over. That's the beauty of the game.
Absolutely, it sure is. And as you mentioned, Carol, so we're going to talk next about some of the types of games. They typically fall into 3 different categories, is what we found, for successful sales training. The first is game show type of games. And Carol, you mentioned that, you know, refresher content is a great way for game-based learning to be used, and game show style games are a great way to deploy that refresher content. So you can use it as a way to refresh information, let people know. It helps them acknowledge the information that they already know or they've already learned. It's quick hit, fast-paced information with the goal of fast and easy recall. These games are typically faster paced, and they get scored and rewards and medals, and you can see how people are doing through leaderboards, and they get immediate, you know, feedback on their success. You know, bell rings if they get it right, or, you know, they hear it wrong if they get it wrong. So it's a great way to reinforce information. And Carol, I know that HP has done some game show style games. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Here are a couple of examples of some game show games. We have a number of, in programs that I run, I have a number of games like this that we use where the platform itself, and by that I mean the sort of wrapper, the game show wrapper, like the one on the bottom, which is based on sort of the You Want to Be a Millionaire TV show. The thing about this is it is that familiar, unencumbered, safe environment of a game show. The people, even you know, globally, even outside of the United States, people understand the concept of a game show game or a simple game like a Pac-Man game, they already understand that. It's not challenging or dangerous in any way or concerning to them because they already get that part. So you see this sort of, and I use the word unencumbered, think about it as creating a safe environment. Then the only thing that's different is the actual information that you're trying to reinforce with them. That's a pretty cool thing as a learning platform goes, you know, a platform that doesn't get in their way and helps them learn and it's fun at the same time. That's pretty cool. So I like to use these types of games with the simple set of facts. You know, if you want people to know 10 things, what better way to do it than to use a game that they're familiar with, that they think is pretty fun, and they go in and you just kind of reinforce those 10 things until they're done playing. The fun of the game will keep the learner engaged through what might be a very mundane lesson if you took those same 10 facts and taught them by telling them and telling them and telling them again and then testing them at the end. So think about game show games when you just want to reinforce and, I'm using quotes now, test some basic facts. So back to you, Julie.
Great. Another very, very common way to use gaming in the corporate space is through simulations. So simulations are probably the most common form of game-based learning that's out there, particularly in the sales area. As we know, role play is a very effective way for salespeople to train and learn. And so simulations, have, you know, they've been used for years, and now they're retitled as game-based learning, which is great. They are also a very safe way for learners to practice their skills. They can do role plays, make decisions they might not normally make, and see what the consequences are. So they're posed a question from a potential customer, and they may answer it one way in the game and to see what might happen. So it gives them a way to practice. And simulations are also very scalable as well. Actually, all of the games are, but simulations are because you can put in a variety of different responses from your customers or for the different learning environments and get different answers and responses and really put the learner in their own shoes, so to speak, in the simulation. Some simulations are more realistic than others, but the intent is that it really gives the learner a safe place to practice. And I know HP's done a couple of great simulations, Carol. I think we've got them up here on the screen now. Talk about those a little.
Yeah, we have a couple of examples here, but I'm certainly not the only one within HP Learning and Development using simulations. There are a lot of my colleagues that use this format. And I just pulled out a couple of examples so people can get an idea. Here you're talking about a little more realistic situation. And the one caution I would give people is, again, when we're thinking about that, people live in a certain context, and what we're talking about today are salespeople, and we want to take them from that context into some kind of simulated environment that seems real to them, where they can practice, and it's got to be real enough that they can then go back to their regular life and apply what they've learned. So sometimes you need to really think carefully in terms of your scenario and the graphics and that sort of thing. But the two examples I'm showing you here, the left is exactly what Julie was talking about, a sales simulation where the learner makes choices while having a discussion with a customer. There's certain levels of rating where if you pick optimum answers, you know, you get a better score than if you pick these sort of mediocre answers. A lot of extensive and robust feedback, resources built into the simulation that they can study before they go into their customer environment. We even have a simulation training that simulates an office with emails coming in from your manager, and when you answer those emails as part of the game-based learning, it actually writes to something like a wiki page that an instructor can review after you've completed that simulation, so the learning actually continues on beyond the simulation. On the right you see an example of a sort of a game-based module, and I'm using that term for the same reason Julie said we're now calling these games. These simulations are very much e-learning and have some gaming elements to them. They don't feel as much like games as the ones we were previously talking about. But in the game on the right, it's a whiteboard discussion, and actually you can't see it on this slide, but those elements on the whiteboard get drawn in almost like in real time, so that the student or learner can practice that whiteboarding before they actually have to perform in front of a customer.
Cool. Now that makes a lot of sense. And then on the opposite spectrum of kind of simulation games, we have what we've loosely termed metaphor games. So do you want to talk us through what that is, Julie?
Sure. Yeah. Metaphor-based games offer a little bit more fun into the learning for increased engagement. So they put the learner in an environment that is fictional, but provides them a way to integrate and contextualize issues or challenges they would face in their daily role in their work life. So in metaphor-based games, the key is knowing what part of their real life that they do get out of the game. So you can see in here, like Cisco, they created a rock and roll spin on a game and put the learner in there and answered questions and really related it back to their daily life. And you can deliver different types of content through the game interface that's more fun, more engaging, and really puts, put some extra spice into the learning.
Great, and again, Carol, I think you have some examples of metaphor-based games that HP have looked at. So you can kind of talk us through what we're looking at here.
Yeah, I really like the metaphor-based games. Probably not because I used to be an English teacher and I like metaphors anyway, but I like metaphor-based games because you can, they may have a little more reuse. The nature of the metaphor could actually apply to multiple content areas, and so you can kind of reuse that model as long as you're doing what Julie was referring to, making sure that your training content really fits with the environment that you're creating in the game. I like the idea that you can pluck some aspect of their current performance and then use the game a little bit in a sophisticated way to focus on that aspect and just that aspect alone. So if you look up at the left, you might think that's a typical game show game, but really we're using kind of the game show or the kind of familiar, almost like a Jeopardy game type environment. But here we've taken, instead of product or knowledge areas as the topics, we've taken different roles in the customer as the topics. Now that really is turning on its head how you might set up a Jeopardy game. So it's a little bit of a stretch, but it's a type of metaphor-based game. We can set that element, whatever that learning element is, into a metaphor of some kind, and then enable that learner to really give it full focus. That's what I like about these games. It also helps support that thing about insinuating the new learning back into your reality. It almost should feel like a bridge from their reality to their new reality, so it becomes part of their new, improved persona, after they've experienced your great game.
All right, no, that's great. Thank you very much for that. So, just about, a game's always a good idea. There are some roles or maybe subjects or functions within organizations that are really just best left alone when it comes to games.
Yeah, games are not always ideal in every single training situation. So really think about where you're going to integrate those games into your learning strategy. Consider your audience. Do they prefer games? Think about the different generations that you have. Most generations like gaming, and in fact the average gamer is around 37 years old nowadays. So, and they've been playing games for a long time. So make sure you know who your audience is. And we'll talk about this a little bit more. Also any technical considerations if you're deploying to a global audience. There are a lot more technical concerns to think about rather than if you're just deploying to a U.S. audience. Also, some sensitive subject matter may not be the right way to, do gaming.
Give us an example of that.
For example, sexual harassment might not be the most appropriate topic to put into a game. So you just have to think about what the subject matter is, and it varies for company to company, of course. And then also thinking about what type of success metrics you want. So if you really require full, deep web analytics based on what you might have as a web-based training course now, there might be some different challenges if you were to deploy gaming through multiple platforms.
Alrighty, great. So there's lots obviously to consider there in terms of the subject matter and the type of format of the game itself that you're going to deploy. And as with all forms of learning and e-learning, there's a constant challenge to make sure that games or content that is sticky. That the investment that's made in the learning activity is used wisely. And good games will often have an element of that kind of addictiveness to ensure that the audience does return time and again. That's the ultimate goal.
Yep.
That impulse can certainly be seen in a variety of games like Angry Birds or Sudoku, even in an offline environment. But it can also be a value to create stickiness to the corporate learning audiences as well. We want to get that same feel in there. So before we go further, let's run a quick poll on why the audience thinks games can be addictive or why they are addictive. So there's quite a few options there. I think we've got 4 options on this one. So why games addictive? One, because maybe I know if I can get it right, I can keep trying and keep going in the game. Because it's just fun and it's enjoyable to play games. That competition thing, because my 4-year-old can work this game and I can't. That happens to me. Or maybe it's done because it passes the time. It's a good, fun way of allowing you to consume some time and gain some knowledge along the way.
And your brain actually does need new information, and they've shown statistical research has shown that games like Sudoku can really help engage your brain. And keep it active for a longer period of time. So as you grow older, your brain can, retain some of its ability and agility.
Absolutely. So let's look at the results there. So nobody wants it just to pass the time, and nobody except me, it seems, especially with their 4-year-old. About 35% are saying, because it's that internal individual challenge, because you can get it if I keep going, and then mostly because it's fun, and I think. Even in the corporate space, I think it's important to keep that element of fun. Absolutely. We can talk more to that. Yeah. Alrighty. So let's look at ideas that can be used to help create that stickiness and that fun element, and help ensure the success of game-based learning.
When you're analyzing what will measure the success for you in your game-based learning strategy, you really need to start from a high level, like you would with any training program, and know the learning objectives for the game-based learning component. So. Are you teaching facts? Are you hoping just to recall and reinforce information? What are the objectives that you have with that particular game? Also making sure that there is actually a need and if gaming is the right solution for it. And then make sure expectations are set for budget and level of complexity within the game. Are you going to do a low interactivity or low complexity game or high? What is the outcome you desire? And really analyze that information. Everybody, all stakeholders need to be on the same page prior to starting.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, because as we said right from the get-go, this is not about creating Halo 3.
No, not at all. No.
Carol, so perhaps you can talk a little bit through about the audience.
Sure. Salespeople like games because they're fast and fun, and they also like rewards, and games always have them. I remember playing Sudoku on my tablet, and at the end they gave me a piece of cake. Even though there's no way to eat a picture of a cake, it's enough of a reward to sort of keep me in the game. We all know that sales training has to be quick, impactful, and engaging, and a game can offer all of that because you can vary the levels of learning depending on the game design you choose. You can align the game design directly to those audience needs. And it goes without saying that salespeople like to compete, and winning a game fits right into that mindset.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
What about the content, and the story that it tells, and is there anything to share on that?
Yeah, well, you'll notice that we've been talking about games all this time, and not so much about graphics and technology. That's because it's all about the content and the story. So before you begin a learning game project, think carefully about your target audience. Your task is to design a safe harbor for a person to use for practice that makes sense to their current state and ultimately fits with their new improved state after you've completed your training. What do your learners care about and value? What offends them? Do they have a sense of humor? Some audiences don't have the same sense of humor than everyone else, and especially audiences don't necessarily have the same sense of humor or value system as learning program managers. You know, we tend to be training lovers. We tend to be excited to try some new training, even if it doesn't really apply to us. So you have to think about that and tailor your gaming environment to them. And carefully consider the complexity. Are you trying to ensure knowledge transfer? Use a game show game. Are you trying to focus on a particular aspect or behavior that requires making informed choices or integrating knowledge to certain situations? Use a metaphor-based game. And if you want to challenge learners to apply their skills and knowledge in a realistic situation, use a simulation. So from the very lowest level to the highest level of learning, games can improve that time to competence. And that's really important for those of us in the training world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that, you know, particularly for, you know, sales organizations, time to competence is a real key factor. So, you know, creating engaging content in a way that, you know, it enables that time to competence to move forward rapidly is certainly huge to all concerned. So there's, you know, lots to consider there in developing a game, you know, where it's going to be used as a learning tool. But, you know, how can we make sure that, you know, learners engage and do actually come back for more?
Well, we need to make sure that the content and the story and the complexity falls into the right level of engagement for the learner. So there is a flow of difficulty and psychological motivation. So the key is to get the right temper between frustration and boredom. So set challenges that are challenging and that they build up, and then before they get frustrating for the learner, find an easier way to do it. To kind of ebb and flow and go back and forth in the difficulty of the game. So you get someone to win something, they get excited, and then, you know, they go again and something gets a little hard. Give them a little bit of a respite, so to speak, so that they can stay engaged. You don't want to get down to, on the screen, it has, you know, A1, A3, A4. You don't want to get to A3 on either side, because that's when you're going to lose people. So you need to try and stay within A1 and A4. That has to do with, you do that by engaging content and the graphical look and feel and the different challenges.
I imagine that, you know, having a good knowledge of your audience would assist greatly on that.
Absolutely, it most definitely would, yeah. We want to make sure that the audience feels that they accomplished or achieved something, but then not quite too much so they continue playing.
Great. And, you know, thinking of our audience, this message to the audience. As we go through, you know, please do send in some questions. We're getting quite a few coming through, but please continue with those and we'll make sure we address those at the end. Julie.
Great. So one of the ways to make sure that you keep people engaged also is the risk and reward. So make sure that the content and the challenges are meaningful to learners, that they have the ability to not do very well and try again. That's very important. And obviously give rewards and incentives, which you could do in any type of training context, not just necessarily in gaming. And then link it perhaps to real-world benefits. Set up some sort of incentive program, a leaderboard that everybody can see who's doing great at, and the leader wins, you know, a new coffee mug or something at the end of the month, whatever it might be, and allow for earning credits and points and awards and whatnot. And also one thing that you need to consider is the competition within gameplay. So people are inherently competitive. They want to survive and they want to keep going and they want to win. People may not know for sure that that's what they want, but the brain is wired for survival. And so we are very competitive. But with that competition, you want to make sure that it's positive and not necessarily negative completion of a game. So you don't want to put the negative spin on it like you're better than Jack. That's not necessarily very positive. But you have earned this gold level ninja status. Woo! Good for you. And also making sure that awards are given out regularly and pretty frequently to keep engagement among all parties there. And then any escalation or cadence of awards. You know, are they getting more? Is it on a regular basis? What's the expectation? And share that with the learners. If it's multiplayer gaming, then it's a great way to keep people engaged.
Yeah, and then on competition, it's not necessarily just competition, of John versus Jack.
Not at all. Internal competition as well, kind of like the game of golf, right? I know many people who golf, but they don't golf to beat someone else. I wouldn't golf to beat you, Darren. I'd golf to beat my score.
Right.
So it's very internalized competition.
Kind of like how to beat your own personal best.
Yeah, most definitely.
What are some of the technical issues that are created in gaming?
Well, we could really spend hours talking about the technical issues in gaming. Some of the things you need to really hone in on and determine and decide on when you are deploying a game-based learning program or strategy are the devices. So what technical requirements do the devices have? What different platforms are you going to deploy to? How many different platforms? Make sure you allow enough time in the development cycle for multiple platform development. If you're going to deploy to an Apple product, for example, you need to be able to develop in the iOS space or with Adobe Air, something like that, so it's compatible with other devices. Flash is a great way to develop games. Those aren't playable on an iPad or iPhone, so you would need to think about another way to do that, like Adobe Air or some other programming platform. Also,
well, I was going to say that makes sense. Increasingly, IT departments don't necessarily know exactly what devices are out there and are engaged.
Correct. That's why really knowing your audience and who's going to be playing the game and their location really makes an impact as well. Particularly if you have a global audience who will be accessing the game through a mobile device. Devices are so very different throughout the globe. You need to make sure that you understand and can develop for multiple device types. Connection speeds is another thing to consider as well. If it's going to be played over the web and not necessarily downloaded as an app on someone's device or on their computer, you need to consider the connection speeds, because if someone's playing a game and the video in the game or the audio in the game trips up, they're going to lose engagement immediately, probably turn the game off, and then you're in a no-win situation. And then you're working uphill to get them to re-engage in the game. So really knowing what kind of connection speeds and infrastructure you're working with is helpful. And then who's hosting it as well. Same type of issues as, where is the host located, and are they reliable and whatnot? Is it living on an intranet or in the cloud somewhere? Who knows?
Yeah, I think as you say, we could probably do an hour-long session just around technical aspects.
Yeah, and this is very high level. I realize that. So it's very important that you do create a functional specifications plan and deployment plan before you even start building. Great,
great. So, Carol, perhaps you can kind of talk us through, some games that are currently in your development cycle, and perhaps you can touch on the platforms that they're being developed for.
Sure. Games, as I've said before, are most successful as enrichment to current learning strategies. So my advice is not to look at games as a sole training element, but look at them in addition to your formal training. So that's exactly what we're doing here. And this slide represents one of my current projects. We're creating 3 sales training games, but the games are special. Once we've completed them, they'll serve as templates for future game development projects. And you can see the games are designed to cover low design complexity, medium design complexity, and high design complexity. And they also represent 3 different learning levels. So, and in addition, and this is what I think is the coolest, each game is built with 2 phases. So first, the learner has to play a somewhat simple game to either prepare them for an adventure or arm them for a battle or train themselves for an athletic competition. And what is really cool about the design is that the learner can try to run the marathon without training, but when he gets a nice pat on the back instead of a gold medal, he'll run rather than walk back to the training area to hone his skills to prepare to run that race again. And that's the power of gaming and learning. We're actually using the game to motivate them to do the learning parts of the game. So take a look at the sketch on the next slide. That isn't the sketch. Take a look at this screen. This is an example of one of the screens of, there we go, there's a sketch. This is one of the games that we're building in partnership with Via Learning. And before I hand it back to Julie to talk about the examples, I just want to note one thing about the alien planet scenario. I personally like to use this because it's totally inclusive environment. Space aliens know no bias, no particular country, region, race, or perspective. It's almost like a pure environment to sort of slip your context for learning into. So Julie, I know you've got some screens there you want to show. You want to comment on our project?
Yeah, so this one here, we are excited about this one as well, Carol, because it is applicable to every audience at any point in time. It'll be a great template to reuse for multiple types of content. And so this is, the learner does answer some, inherently they are multiple choice questions at the beginning. So the first level, the learner goes in and they're, they have to be the hero and save the planet. So they answer some questions and they, stop some natural disasters that could occur on the planet, and then they get to the next level, they have to plug the sulfuric acid geyser, for example. They answer questions, they plug that geyser, then they move on. And then ultimately they are challenged by some different, in this instance, leaders, and they have to get information from those leaders and help save the planet. So it's very much multiple choice questions as far as the back-end programming goes, but the rich interactive experience and the display of the content is in a fun, engaging way. There will be some timers and some challenges and points earned and rewards had. So the learner will be very engaged throughout the whole learning process. Multiple questions can be integrated into this. It's very scalable. We can add different leaders. We can add different challenges along the way, and just really keep people engaged and make it longer or shorter, depending on what content there is that we want to send. So this one here is another example of a game that we are building. So it is the high complexity, we're calling it the Olympics. So it's very, very scalable. You can add multiple events. For this particular example, we have 4 events. The learner will go in, and like Carol had mentioned, they'll do some training if they want, or they don't have to. They can go in and play the event right away, or they can go do some training, and depending on the training, how successful they do in that training, where they're answering questions and completing tasks, they will get a better opportunity to win the gold medal. If they don't, then they have to go back and perhaps do some training and try again. You can add lots of individual games or even group games within this particular game that we're building. So you can have 25 individual events that somebody would complete. So extremely scalable.
So it's something, building with reuse and scalability in mind.
Absolutely. All of them are, yeah.
Certainly helps to make those budget goals get further as well.
Yeah, most definitely. And so our Storm Chaser solution is more of a medium complexity type of game. And this is where the learner will go through and do some little mini challenges or mini games of sorts and earn a way to tame a storm. So they will get basic information, and then the next task they will accomplish in the second round is to recommend a particular solution to a customer. So it really helps put all of the information as far as the industry and the solution and the market together into one piece. So it's applying the knowledge that had been learned in the first level of gameplay there. So we're excited for all 3 of them. I think they're all going to be very successful.
Great. So, okay. So before we go through and enter into the Q&A session, there's been several questions asked already, and we'll address those. Please feel free to ask more should you wish to. But there's a lot to think about overall in terms of the audience itself. Who is that audience, and what's the best way to engage those. But also the subject, the format, how the game can impart knowledge, and how you create it to be sticky, and what you've got to do to keep that learner engaged. You also need to consider how to include the game as part of a large package of learning, and you need to be clear on the learning objectives of the game itself. And then, as Carol had talked us through, the type of game that's going to be best to share that information, be it a simulation, be it a game show type format, or a metaphor-based game. And then, the most important, I think, is come through time and time again, content. So you really need to consider the audience in terms of what content they're going to find engaging, as well as the technology, the platforms, the location of the audience. Does this content need to be mobile to actually reach your audience and engage them? So there's really lots to consider then in deciding to use game-based learning. So thank you for that content. That was great, and I want to go into the questions that we've received. So one question I've received: how long or complex should games be? Julie, do you want to?
Well, that's a great question. I think it depends. Definitely depends on how much content you want in there, just what your own company's specifications are. Gameplay is a great way. Sorry, let me back up for just a second. So games are best served, I believe, in smaller chunks, so 2 to 5 minutes of gameplay. But some companies like longer games, which is fine, 10, 15 minutes. Depends how much effort you want to put into it. So it really just depends on your own organization, but 2 to 5 minutes in length are what I think is most preferential for most people.
Okay, that's
particularly the sales force. They like quick information.
Carol, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I do. Of course, every time we talk about length, I always think, well, if I had more time, it'd be shorter. We can't discount the fact that when you're trying to make a very, very short learning experience, it may take you a pretty long time. And I don't want to sort of leave that on the table unsaid. But yes, I think there should be enough quick gratification to keep the motivation. So whether you are trying to, like we do sometimes, want to prepare for something by giving people 5 or 6 key facts we wish everyone would know before we start the conversation, we want a game that they can play in a few minutes, and then they can get those 5 facts. Or you want a game that gives them enough gratification, like a simulation, that they're going to come back and continue to work through that simulation later in these small chunks. So it's a combination of, is the game itself very, very short, or is the time to gratification very, very short, so they'll come back and continue playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. And then one question we've been asked here is to kind of re-go through which games apply to which scenarios. So just to quickly touch on this. So Carol mentioned earlier, if you're trying to ensure it's a knowledge transfer, the game show style is a really great way of doing that. If you're trying to focus on a particular aspect of behavior that requires making informed choices or integrating knowledge to certain situations, metaphor-based gaming is very good for that. And then, finally, if you want to challenge learners to apply those skills or apply that knowledge in a realistic situation, simulations are a great way to go for that. That leads me to another question, which is, in the instance of simulations, have we been tracking, or maybe Carol, in your Hewlett-Packard experience, have you been tracking learners' behavior 6 months or more after the games take place to see if that behavior, that new learned behavior, sticks, or if they're reverting back to their previous or their old behaviors? Do you have anything to share on that, Carol?
Well, I think we do have some evidence that it does stick. In other words, they use a simulation for practice, and then they can apply it in their work. And of course, and it's the reason, and I think you probably hear the hesitation in my voice and the same hesitation with Julia's. When you look at those simulations, most of the time they're really an e-learning, a traditional e-learning experience dressed up as a game. Because in fact it has more in common really with traditional e-learning. It usually has a lot of depth of content, maybe resources to read, takes longer to do. It has tracking related to types of answers that they give, and ratings, and the long-term kind of ratings. So there's a lot, I think, and those have been around for a long time. So there's a lot more evidence that those are an effective way if all that front work is done. The right audience is identified. It's identified as actual training where they may be required to do this simulation, and you're tracking those very people versus, the halo game goes out onto Best Buy and you try to sell it to anybody who walks through the door. When you're talking about a simulation, you're really targeting a very specific audience. Hopefully you're requiring that they take it, and you're tracking their behavior the same way you would with e-learning. And there is evidence of effectiveness there.
Great. Thank you for that, Carol. I appreciate that. And this question makes sense given our initial poll of who's using gaming. About half and half were and weren't. So the question here is what suggestions do you have for an organization that is new to getting into gaming and game-based learning? Any suggestions of how would they start, I guess?
Well, I'll start with that one, Darren. So I think one of the first things that an organization needs to do is look at what their current training strategy is and where the gap in knowledge is. So do a needs analysis or a gap analysis on what information is lacking, and then perhaps deploy a game to solve that issue, to provide more training and reinforcement and knowledge deployment on the information that is not being retained by people. Mm-hmm. That would be the best way to start.
Okay, find out what the issues are that you're trying to solve, and then discover if gaming is an appropriate way.
Right, exactly. Yep, absolutely.
And Carol, obviously, you've been involved in game-based learning for some time, but do you have any thoughts for members of the audience that perhaps haven't so far jumped into game-based learning?
Well, gaming and games and gamification are pretty vague terms, so I would make sure that in terms of what they're looking at, they're all in agreement on what that means. Because sometimes when people are talking about gamification and game-based learning, all they're talking about is we're going to have badges and little stars next to your name when you go in and take training on our learning management system. That's gamification. So if they're really talking about creating game-based learning modules, I would suggest start small, because you can always underestimate the amount of work involved, the amount of content development, and the amount of platform or interface development involved in creating a game initially. And then take a look around at, just Google around and look at some examples of games. There are a lot of games that are templates already exist. A lot of those show game type things, the templates already exist. And all kinds of vendors are happy to partner with you, including VIA Learning, but other vendors as well are willing to partner with you to help build those games. And they really are quite easy to build if you have a good solid set of multiple choice questions. But again, I would confirm what people are really asking for when they say they want game-based learning. Because sometimes they're thinking about a simulation, sometimes they're thinking about badges. Sometimes you don't even know what they're thinking about. So for me, they are fun-based modules that support as enrichment a more traditional training program, and that's how I think of them, and that's how I approach them in all my projects.
Great, thanks for that, Carol. And then this question appears to be at the other end of the spectrum, where I guess for this individual games must already be part of the strategy. The question is, what would be a good strategy for discouraging oversaturation or misuse of games or game elements in courses? Individual states, for a lot of stakeholders, games are nice and shiny new hammer, and all of the learning objectives are nails. So people can get caught up in fads or buzzwords or overuse of a tool to the point where it can become, no longer becomes effective, or it becomes ineffective. So, can gaming be overused in this way?
I want to jump in on that one, because I think games are self-regulating. LPMs may not be self-regulating, but games are. If you go off and build a dozen games and post them someplace, and nobody plays them, the shine is gone. So part of the whole thing is to look at it as a program. How is the game supporting your program? How is it tied to your metrics you're already doing with your e-learning, and ensuring that that game has actually got a role in the plan. Just posting a lot of games and activities and then just expecting people to go play them is a sure way to end up with a lot of really dusty games. It's the way I would view it. But Julie, you got a better answer to that?
No, I really don't. I think you're right on.
I think you're very much relying on the audience to tell you too much, right?
Mm-hmm. Most definitely.
That makes a lot of sense. So a lot of folks out there, are using instructor-led training. And one of the questions that was asked here is, how do we integrate gaming into our instructor-led training strategy? So is there a use for game-based learning or perhaps knowledge assessment type stuff as part of instructor-led training?
Absolutely. It's a great way to give assessments during instructor-led training. Breaks up the monotony of someone talking with you and gives people a little respite, so to speak, and a little fun. And you can also do face-to-face games, of course, during instructor-led training, which I know a lot of people do already. But it's also a nice little break in a way to give people a safe place to answer some questions and have a little bit of fun while they're involved in instructor-led training.
Great. I suppose it also helps provide that initial quick feedback to the instructor on how effective that training is.
Absolutely, especially if you have live scoring immediately.
Yeah. So there's lots of benefits there. Well, I want to send a thank you very much for attending to the audience. Also, I want to extend a special thank you to Carol Cohen from Hewlett-Packard for joining us today. Excellent information there. Lots of good stuff, lots of stuff to consider there. And also thank you to Julie Brink as well for bringing your extensive knowledge on this issue. So thanks very much for attending the VIA Learning and Hewlett-Packard webinar on game-based learning.